Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegets filtration system. What? The Weegets.com, Weegets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product.
Both cool the smoke from 1300 degrees to just 90 into your lungs. Plus, the maze pipe and pre-roll filters get rid of all the gunk that you just don't want in your lungs if you can help it.
Add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Safetiva Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Safetiva understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Safetiva Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to safetiva.com.
We are a cultivation through to consumption lifestyle brand for the cannabis industry. Of course, the crown jewel in our product line is the Armoire home grow system. So now with Green Goddess Supply, we can take you everywhere from growing it in the Armoire right through to storing it, consuming it, rolling it, storing it, you name it, A to Z. Our goal is to enable everybody and anybody anywhere to be able to produce their own organic flower quickly, easily, discreetly, and inexpensively.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it could make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product.
Both cool the smoke from 1300 degrees to just 90 into your lungs. Plus, the maze pipe and pre-roll filters get rid of all the gunk that you just don't want in your lungs if you can help it.
Add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another really live edition of Green Rush Live, the regularly scheduled business of cannabis talk show that Pro Cannabis Media produces every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. And it is our longest running live show since we've been doing it now for 3 years. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and sometimes host of Green Rush Live. And this particular show is going to be dedicated to education. I think anybody who is in the cannabis industry understands the importance of educating not only those who are interested in the cannabis industry, but those who have always kind of avoided it and have kind of created this stigma that we all fight on a regular basis. And Stockton University out of New Jersey is a place where our old friend, Rob Mejia, has been a regular professor for a number of years in this space. And he was nice enough to introduce me, to his people at Stockton U. And I will be teaching a course on fighting the stigma through normalization. We're going to try and create normalization before we get to legalization through public relations. And joining Rob on our Zoom call this afternoon on Green Rush Live is Angela Speakman. And Angela, first, I'm going to start with you and then I'll get to Rob. But how in the world did you get into this oral communication space with a last name of Speakman? That's awesome. Can I get that last name?
I actually can remember the very first day that I started teaching. And my first teaching opportunity was with Atlantic Cape Community College on their Atlantic City campus. And I was going in to teach a writing class. And that was the very first question. And it honestly, and I don't even think the students believe me, that it had not dawned on me until that point. And most of the students did not believe that that was my real name.
Well, we're glad that you're here. We'll get to the courses you're talking to. I just want to bring Rob Mejia in, who's been a kind of a regular with us over the last few years. Whenever we talk about education in this space, Rob is a guy that we like to go to and talk with. Rob, it's great to see you again.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. I'm delighted to be here. And yes, we have a lot of good things going on at Stockton University and elsewise in the education area.
You know, you and I were just reminiscing before we started to get going on this, that, you know, it's been 3 years since you and I first talked to each other and interviewed, and you became a regular on our, back then it was called Cannabis Chat, and we were doing it live during the pandemic, which was great. It's part of our story, if you will, where I explained to people during the pandemic, everybody went home and kind of, you know, battered down the hatches and stayed in. And I went to my office every day and created content and started using Zoom as a news gathering device. And then here we are, 800 hours of content later, 800 videos later, 800,000 views of our stuff on YouTube, and we're still alive and kicking. Rob, back then, there weren't too many colleges doing cannabis studies. Now, it's like if you don't offer it in a legal state, especially, you get a lot of pushback. How much development has Stockton had in this cannabis certificate course that they offer?
Well, the growth has been pretty phenomenal. So we do have a couple of ways that we do educate the students and community in terms of cannabis education. So we have our 4 credit classes, and so that means students can actually minor in cannabis studies at Stockton. And we are still the only school in New Jersey that offers a minor in cannabis studies. And that means that students can major in anything. We have a lot of healthcare majors. We have a lot for business, but then they take 5 classes, including an internship, and they get their minor in cannabis studies. So that's what we do for our actual students. But then we do have a continuing studies department, and they offer online, self-paced, and now other unique curriculum offerings to the community. Because what happened is when we started offering our minor, we started getting calls from all kinds of people. They said, can I take the medical cannabis class? Can I take the internship class? Can I take the law class? And if you're not enrolled, the answer is you can't. And also, of course, those courses were booked pretty quickly. So we decided what we need to do is start offering very flexible, accessible courses through continuing studies for anybody who wants to take them. So there's a lot of people who are pivoting their careers. There's people who I call the canna curious, other people interested in health and cannabis that all come and take any number of the 10 online self-paced cannabis courses we have. And again, we have some new things cooking that involve the 2 of you.
Yeah, that's great. We'll get to that in a minute. Angela, I'd like to know a little bit more about the course you're teaching through this Stockton University.
Well, the course really focuses on cannabis and communications, which really does fit in my wheelhouse, and really spends time exploring perspectives and how they've been shaped by messaging, and really how that links to the development of our attitudes, beliefs, and values about lots of things, where that foundation's laid to help students explore and examine the factors that contribute to how those kinds of aspects of our identity develop, and then takes that next step to look at the cannabis messaging that's come through so many very direct and sometimes subtle channels and from different sources too, and helps students explore how they themselves have arrived at some of those kinds of perspectives, and how other people have also developed their own views about cannabis. And really, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that education and fact-based information, it becomes really crucial in widening those perspectives.
Yeah, I think Rob actually outlined a beautiful thing about the different type of person who's interested in the cannabis space. It's not really that 18 to 22-year-old right out of high school. It's pretty much anybody who has a desire to learn something that they can apply to real life. And Rob, obviously, that is the most important part, is to get these kinds of lessons out into the public. You mentioned the Canna Curious. That is by far the 50 plus unit, the 50 plus demographic. That is the fastest growing demographic in cannabis. It is that group that, grew up in I guess it would be the 70s. I'm doing some math because, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and, and they're just interested in seeing what this whole new cannabis legal movement is all about, and what kind of medicinal benefits they may be able to get from partaking and being enlightened about this plant medicine. How important is it and to target those that are the most curious about this industry?
Well, I think it is such an important market for a couple reasons. So part of it is that a lot of the people that you're describing actually grew up and had some encounters with cannabis. They may have tried it in high school, they may have tried it in college, and they know that they're hearing a lot of false information. So I think part of it is they can take their own experience, which they know and they have, and they can apply that to what they're hearing now, and they can kind of compare the two. And if you think you're hearing a lot of different falsehoods, at least for me, that's a chance to really dive in and find out what is really the truth here. I had my own small experience when I was a teenager or in college or whatever, shortly thereafter. But now I really want to find out what this can be. And it also can bring up business opportunities. It can provide opportunities for me to help my friends be more healthy, help my parents be more healthy, all the people around me. So I think it is just such a rich area to dive into. And once you start finding out the truth about cannabis, and especially the history of prohibition and what it's done to incarcerate a certain number of people and all that, I find it just an irresistible topic that you dive in. And I do think that people who are 50 and older are willing to at least have the conversation because they have at least some sort of background, so that's a way in to at least start the conversation. And that's really what you want to do with cannabis education.
Absolutely. And Angela, Rob mentioned misinformation, false information. These days, now that the consumer is in charge of what they watch, when they watch, how they watch, where they watch any kind of news show, how are we ever going to get out of the misinformation trend and start getting back to just facts in communication and reporting? That's a big question.
I was thinking to myself, that's a big question, but a great question. And okay. I think that like Rob's comments about like looking at individuals and then kind of looking to understand where some of these kinds of falsehoods originate, why people rely on them, things like that. And my approach and an approach that I have found to be a really good way in, even when you have someone that has barriers to hearing that information, that's not necessarily going to be receiving information in a very open-minded kind of way, is to really look at history. And what I found is it's not just one instance, like a historical incident or event or a fact. Typically, these things have to be provided in a package, right? Like in a continuum of historical information and environmental factors and things like that, where then you have the ability to develop a more comprehensive view. One of the aspects of the course material for the Cannabis and Communications course is to compare, what I did in that course was compare the New York Times and a year's worth of publication of the New York Times in 1972 to a year's worth of reference in the brand new Argo, the Stockton newspaper at the time. That was their first year. And literally the way the word is used, which word is used, I guess I have to back up, which word is being referenced and what it's looking like in headlines in the New York Times versus, well, it didn't make it into any headlines in the Argo for 1972, but in those actual student-driven articles, you have very different tone, you have different words, you have different slants on what's being reported. And if you can imagine being person XYZ in 1972 reading the Argo versus XYZ person in 1972 reading the New York Times, and the consistent messaging. The New York Times was extremely consistent in bringing up race, for example, in crime reports, whereas that's not happening in the Argo. The frequency is much, obviously in the New York Times, is much more prevalent. So with an example like that, I think that looking at things to side by side that provide insight on that messaging, and then forcing yourself to kind of put aside the bias that you're coming to that piece with, which means you have to acknowledge it first, can help folks to really widen that view. And it becomes harder to argue, fact, truth, and things like that. So very, very essential to get rid of that misinformation.
Right. And when I teach multimedia journalism in the college area around Boston, I do try to explain to the kids that it is about the facts, but there's a human element to reading those facts. There's a human element to reporting and sharing what the facts are with your audience, because some reporters may see their own personal bias in not even including some of the things they know about the story, but they don't think it's as important as some of the other parts, other facts that they see. So there's always that human element in reporting. And we're seeing it now because we really have the most divided country that I've ever been a part of. I mean, I do remember the Vietnam War and protesting the Vietnam War in the 60s and early 70s. And that was another era that had, you were either for war or against war, or you were either for being in Vietnam or not being in Vietnam. And it was a single line. Now in modern society, we've got so many other lines. Rob, where do you think will we ever get back to the point where we had I call it the Walter Cronkite syndrome, right? Where everybody trusted one guy reporting the facts, but beyond him, and now you've got 40 or 50, and it isn't just the old Walter Cronkite out there. It's a mix of people, which is more reflective, I think, on where our country is at right now. Will we ever get back to the point where we'll have people understanding fact-based journalism as opposed to the human element that kind of sways it one way or another? What do you think?
I think you've sort of stepped into the area of reporting and media as business.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen is that there are a lot of newspapers in particular that have been taken over by some large interests. And then also you have just the fracturing of the media, whereas before, a lot of us used to get our media in the same places. Right. But now we have choices everywhere. We can get things online. We can get local publications. You could go and get all kinds of different perspectives that are made to dovetail with what you already believe. So I really think we're at a point where it's both very good and very bad. I mean, you can find things that dovetail with your interests and they go very deep into your area. But then you can also absolutely find misinformation. And that's what we're seeing that stokes a lot of the kind of fear, misunderstanding that we have. So I think the simple answer is no, I don't think we're ever going to go back to that. But I do think I see some promise in education and curriculum, because even in New Jersey, I see that they are starting a required course for high schoolers where you have to take a course in how to determine if the media that you're getting is reliable, is factual, and is true. And I think if we start training people to look at the media, look at the sources, I don't know how many reports I've had my students look at, and then I said, well, who funded it? Who was behind it? What were they trying to prove? Did they start with a certain hypothesis? What does that tell you if they start with a negative hypothesis on something? So it's really digging in and getting behind it. And then once you find the sources, that tells you, maybe I should look at this with a little bit more of a skeptical eye, perhaps.
Yeah. Angela, I'd love to ask you the same kind of question. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where we'll have unbiased reporting? Or is that going to be maybe an avatar, delivering that to us as opposed to a human? What's your feeling?
Well, I don't know that we could ever get to a point where there's completely unbiased, because even how you select the facts that you choose to share and how you disregard others, there's inherent bias there. And I think that one of the most exciting things about all of this cannabis education opportunity because it does trickle out even farther beyond cannabis too, is it's engaging folks in conversations about acknowledging their own bias. And that doesn't mean that we can get rid of it altogether. And that doesn't mean that we can realistically go to any source and eliminate it completely. But having that kind of awareness of what that bias can influence and the decisions that are being made, I think that that is a good thing for all of us. And I'm okay with not having the one Walter Cronkite as the source, because again, you can't escape the bias. And I tend to believe that fact checking, source checking, when you are looking at more, you're being enriched by other perspectives, other slants, other pieces of data. And having that array can sometimes be helpful. We're living in 2023. It's one of the blessing and the curse of the internet and the global reach that it has, is that we have more access today than we ever have, but then that makes our jobs infinitely harder. And I think Rob's points about some of the required curriculum that's being instituted in schools, and really having those discussions with people about what it means to be an aware consumer of information, and the responsibility that we all have to do that is really on par. And cannabis is providing, whether we like it or not, the opportunity for this topic to kind of bubble up to the surface even more.
And there's so many elements to this industry. It lends itself to higher learning. Oh, pardon the pun there, but definitely to extended learning, if you will. And Rob, we've talked about this in the past. Excuse me. You've got science, you've got research, you've got law, you've got politics, you've got policy, you've got, I'm probably forgetting about 5 or 6 other elements. Growing, botany, all that stuff is all inside the cannabis industry. To me, when I started learning about it, even 3-4 years ago, I was fascinated. That's the word I kept using. I'm just fascinated by all the information and the knowledge you can get from all these different places that have cannabis right in the middle of it. And what's the most amazing thing is this plant has become politicized. To me, I lived to see that day that they actually point fingers at each other on both sides of the aisle. So, well, that's your problem. Well, that's your problem. No, it is a plant medicine that is here to help all of our problems. That's the way I look at it. Rob, how much depth is there to this industry? There's quite a bit, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple things too. I think one thing that sometimes people forget is that cannabis, as you mentioned, is plant medicine. But if you look at all the pharmaceuticals, one out of every 4 pharmaceuticals is plant-based medicine. If you look at aspirin, for example, aspirin pretty much, you could say, started the pharmaceutical industry, and it was synthesized from willow bark. So we have a huge tradition of using all kinds of plant medicine. So if I have a friend of mine and they're taking 4 pharmaceuticals, it's likely one of those is plant-based. And that's really at the end of that's at the bottom of it. Cannabis is plant-based medicine. The other thing I think that we forget sometimes is hemp. And hemp is now being funded, at least for all the industrial purposes that it could and should be made for. So you're going to see a lot of development in things like in the building trades. You're going to see things in health and beauty aids, carpet, paper, fabric, bioplastics, replacements for plastics, which is fantastic. So you have that. But then the other thing that's interesting about the cannabis industry is that there are actually more jobs that support the industry that are what they call plant touching industries. So there's a larger percentage of jobs that are basically what you do: media, there's attorneys, there's consultants, there's security camera installations, there's pavers, people put up the fences, HVAC. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. And those jobs are also professional jobs. So I think those are a couple things to keep in mind. That we have a history of plant medicine. Hemp is going to be a gigantic source of income for us. And that also our jobs are professional, and a lot of them don't deal actually with touching the plant. So yeah, you can start pulling that string and just keep going and going, and it's almost infinite. I almost challenge people sometimes to come up with a job that does not have some connection to cannabis.
Ooh, that's a good one right off the bat. It's a good icebreaker at the top of the show, at the top of a classroom. Anyway, So, Angela, the depth of the different types of study of cannabis, and every single one of them does have a communications element to it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And speaking of, one of the things that I challenge students every semester is to come up with any kind of career or occupation that does not require any communication. And usually I will like sweeten the deal and say, oh, like I'll put $20 in for you, or $50 if you can come up with anything. And we go through this exploration, and because we're not just thinking about, oh, this is the only way, this verbal form of communication or this written form of communication. And in order for us to exchange information, there really isn't anything. And I think that cannabis ends up providing this truly unique, right? So there's not been any other product that's ever come to the market or is coming to the market through this system of workarounds, essentially, through public opinion, kind of, but it's too layered of a thing to just say it's public opinion, where something's come to market in this particular way, especially considering its history. And when we look back throughout history, we do see that, in 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, there were still instances of it being politicized in whatever situation it was affiliated with. There was a lot of religious intersection, a lot of government involvement intersection, even if it wasn't, the politicized nature of the topic that we're experiencing today. So when we think about cannabis as something to look at how we're communicating and why we're communicating this way, the three of us could be here for hours, probably days and days, just talking about all of the different nuanced looks and instances of cannabis communications, and what those results have had, what those exchanges did, and what the outcomes have been.
Rob, you brought up the word synthesized. Recently in the news, the DEA has finally come out, and there's actually a movement to actually ban Delta-8, okay, which is the synthesized hemp. It's kind of like hemp on steroids, so that you could get high from hemp, which is not the purpose of the plant in the first place. In the first place, the pulp industry back in the 1920s and 30s feared hemp, and because they were in the paper industry, and they wanted to publish newspapers, and they needed pulp to do it that way, as opposed to naturally, perhaps, on hemp. And we don't need to get into who was behind all that, but the point is, they're now recognizing that there is a difference between synthesized marijuana and that is being grown in the ground. And Rob, I know that you have some experience on the growing side of things. At least you recognize the importance of it. What's your feeling about finally the government coming around after passing the Farm Bill in 2018 and recognizing, gee, maybe we should have put out some regulations when we made it legal? Because once humans get involved, they're looking to cut corners, they're looking to make different things. I mean, that's the nature of our being. But talk a little bit about finally getting to the point where they are looking at regulating and perhaps even banning the Delta-8, or the infused part of the hemp plant, if you will, that can get you intoxicated.
Sure. So one of the things that happened was, unfortunately, the hemp farmers needed much more help than they got in 2018. And there are some very concrete examples of that. So that even the government definition of having to have 0.3% THC or less, that hinders a lot of the farmers, because oftentimes the plant will go hot, as they say, and it goes above that 0.3. So at that point, you either have to remediate it or you have to throw it away, basically, because at that point, then it becomes cannabis. Even if they had raised that to 1%, and 1% is the minimum amount of THC you need to get any sort of psychotropic or high effects. So even if they had done that, that would have helped. But and then there was the crash of the CBD prices. So you had all these hemp farmers who were out there, and they were really stuck. So in the world of hemp and cannabis, there's always workarounds. So one of the workarounds they found is this minor cannabinoid of delta 8, and then also you can talk about delta 10, you can talk about THCO. There's a whole parade of them. It's not just delta 8, but delta 8 is by far the most popular. And it is popular because they've figured out that if you can create it in a lab and you can create it so that it gives you the same effects or very similar effects to delta 9. So the biggest problems are, first of all, that delta 8 is untested. So for me, that should be a non-starter. And I think that all delta 8 should have been tested so you know what's going in your body, especially for somebody who may be a medical patient. But I do feel for the hemp farmers that got stuck. So they felt like they really didn't have other paths to go down. So I would love to see us build up the processing part of the hemp industry and do things like provide decortication machines so you can actually take the stalks and make it into all those things that we were just discussing before. So I do think delta 8 and the other cannabinoids absolutely do need to be regulated. I'm actually glad they're going to be banned because I think there are some severe safety issues. But on the same time, I would ask the government to please help the hemp farmers in other ways by supplying processing equipment, raising that limit up to 1%, giving other grants. So yeah, I think we've made our own issue at Delta 8.
And who's going to describe and explain the entourage effect and how THC and CBD work together in this plant? One has that psychotropic, intoxicating, that's the THC, and then CBD has a dampening effect, and then there's something called terpenes. And terpenes are what is mixed with these other cannabinoids to steer the effectiveness of both of the cannabinoids, the main cannabinoids in the plant. And I'm sure I just confused half the audience because it isn't the most easy thing to understand, right? It just isn't. This is why I keep going back to the people that are making the rules are sometimes clueless about how this plant works and the cannabinoids in it. And Angela, we'll come back to you and get your opinions about this. Again, when you come to the point where you're trying to explain something that you think is simple, but most of the populace has no clue on what a terpene is or a cannabinoid is, how much primer education is still needed at the level of in the adult use market? That's my question, Angela.
Yeah, I mean, big question and big answer because it varies. It varies so wildly.
Right.
And one of the most effective, mechanisms for figuring out where someone's at when it comes to just cannabis awareness is I just start by asking, like, tell me what you know, and we'll go from there. Tell me what your concerns are, and we'll go from there. And, it's funny because not too long ago, I was watching, there's a really great TEDx where Dr. Rachel Knox, who is a very smart person, and listening to her, similar to listening to Rob, like it just, I learn something every time and it blows me away because there's always more to learn, right?
Right.
And what I've started doing is with people in my circle, whether they're friends, family, colleagues. I mean, at this point, if I'm with you in line long enough at a grocery store or dispensary, like there's plenty, and we all have these phones on us so that we can pull information up so easily. And literally saying, let's watch this together. Let's read this together and let's go through it. Tell me what your reactions are so that I can provide information that meets the person where they are. And also, I'm never in the business of trying to convince anyone or everyone to consume or not consume. Right. My desire is to convince someone to be willing to receive and process the information that's out there so that they can make informed decisions on their own about what that usage is.
Yeah, you're actually hoping that everybody has an open mind. Rob, you mentioned it too. That doesn't happen these days, as we know, because we talk about access to media and information. A lot of people are just getting the information from the side where they feel comfortable, right, Rob?
Yeah, that's true, but I do think there are ways in, and much like Angela, I like to say that I am here to inform and not to persuade.
Yeah.
And I do like to acknowledge some of the dangers, challenges, et cetera. But I think there are definitely ways to start the conversation. I mean, if you do find out what people know, that gives you a sense of where you can go in the conversation. But I often like to start either with hemp because I figure if someone has an issue with hemp that's like corn or cotton, if you have an issue with the fiber, and we're not going to have a conversation beyond that, then I'm just going to walk to someone else, and I'm gonna just say that's fine. So I do often start with hemp and the history of hemp, but then I also go to CBD as well, and I find part of that is because most of my peers are at least interested in CBD, or they know someone who's used it and they know it doesn't get them high. They know, especially if they're a weekend warrior or something, they've got a little arthritis, how effective it can be as a topical. So and something like that, I think, is a good way to find your way in. And then also, unfortunately, another way is through a conversation about cancer. I think almost every one of us knows somebody who's had cancer, and there are very few people who would begrudge the use of cannabis for helping nausea, controlling pain, and also stimulating appetite. I mean, part of my story, one of the reasons I started, even jumping down this rabbit hole, is my sister Teresa got cancer. And so, of course, that started the research that I was doing. But I find if you talk about hemp, you talk about CBD, and unfortunately, if you talk about cancer, that those are three ways to start a very productive conversation with probably about 90% of the people I talk to.
Yeah. And I've talked to doctors that are experts on the endocannabinoid system that's in every mammal that interacts directly with the plant medicine that is cannabis. And I have, kind of put out my own opinions about this stuff, because I recognize that in 1900 to 1910, 5 million prescriptions for cannabis were written by doctors who are graduates of Harvard Med, Yale Med, and NYU Med, which are the oldest medical programs in our country. So they were using it medicinally. And then I asked the doctors, I go, let me ask you a question. If they hadn't done that, and you guys being the medical community, had the opportunity to study it instead of vilify it over the last 80 years, would we have as much cancer, epilepsy, MS, all those things that have been shown that this plant does help with? And of course, the overall effect is building up the human immune system. And that alone, to me, shows that if you were using this stuff, then perhaps your immune system is really good. It all depends on your metabolism. We know everybody's different, and we know it's not for everybody. But the research would have been so much further ahead from where it is right now. And Rob, I know I've used this with you before. I use the quote by Beth Waterfall, who's with Elevate Northeast. She's the educational director for NECAN, New England Cannabis Conventions. And Beth has the greatest quote of all time. It was granted in 2019, I'm pretty sure, when she was on with us, where she said, there are no experts in cannabis because we're starting to finally research it the right way. And obviously researching the cannabis that is out there for testing and use by adults in the 21st century is a lot different than the cannabis that perhaps we used back in the 70s as students at college. And what's your feeling about saying there are no experts in cannabis right now? Rob, and then I'll come to Angela. Go ahead.
That's a very tough question, because I do think there are some experts, but I think they are in particular areas. So there are absolutely some cannabis scientists that are my go-tos, and I like to read what they're studying, what they're researching, and I really do feel like they know about as much about cannabis science as we do at this moment. And there's cultivators too. So I think you can actually find experts in certain areas. But I think it's very hard to find somebody who is kind of an overall expert that can take you from cultivation to processing, dispensary, hemp, ancillary businesses. Then you're talking about a crowd of probably 50 different people who can all do different things. So I do think there is no one expert, but there are definitely people who I think are experts in certain niches.
Right.
And I hope every day I inch closer to that in cannabis education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love it when I get the calls from friends and they're like, well, you're an expert in cannabis. And I'm like, I am not an expert in cannabis. I'm an expert in talking about cannabis. I'm an expert at asking questions about cannabis, but I don't know that much. And you mentioned growing. I've got a black thumb. I am afraid of trying to grow cannabis because of the guilt that I will have of a living thing that'll be back in my hands again. And I just don't want to hurt it. I really just don't want to hurt it. Angela, what's your feeling? I mean, you obviously, I consider you, even though I've just met you, an expert in communications because you get it. Okay. That being said, do people come to you as an expert in cannabis or an expert in cannabis communication?
Well, I mean, even if they attempted to come to me, I would correct them, because, I would echo the same thing that Rob said. And anybody that comes to me, generally speaking, and says that they're an expert about the whole process of anything, I will end up having just a heightened level of skepticism there, because, experts, as far as, the way that I see it, it usually takes years and hours and hours and hours of dedicated pursuit of information and application of that information. And when you think about where we're at today in New Jersey, we're very fortunate to have extremely knowledgeable, passionate people. And there is not a day that goes by that I am not in awe and extremely thankful for the people that have been working tirelessly for decades on this, and the risk has notoriously been so much greater before we have arrived at this moment today, right? So I'm very fortunate that we have this network, but even in New Jersey, it's an infant industry. Right. And even the mature industries are not that old. So we're all still finding our way. And I actually think that we're very fortunate that we can look to other countries that have been more open-minded and really more accepting of cannabis as a wellness substance, and really embracing that. I think of Israel and other countries that have really wanted to have seen the value and wanted to do what they could to make sure that the research was available and that there was actual data to rely on. So I think we also, as a nation, are fortunate that we can look to other places for some of that expertise. And hopefully, as cannabis becomes a more normalized topic in all of our daily lives, and in New Jersey, as a New Jerseyan, there won't be anybody that is not touched, whether directly or indirectly, by cannabis. There is no doubt about it. Even the tax revenue alone that's going into communities and statewide efforts, there won't be anyone that's not unaffected. And I'm just so happy that we're having conversations. I'd rather welcome someone, challenge an expert, and give an opportunity for someone to expand the conversation about cannabis so that someone else can learn something. So I think we're just in a very fortunate place at this point that there are so many folks like both of you that are interested and invested in making sure the conversations happen.
Yeah, and that's great. I appreciate it. And of course, anybody who is interested in learning more about this plant or this business or this science or the research, or just using it, as Rob explains, to get out, if you've got tennis elbow and you want to rub some CBD topicals on it, that can help you get through the day or recover, which is really the most important thing after you work out and all that. So it is. Rob, how do people find Stockton University? We know it's in New Jersey. I don't even know if it's in northern New Jersey, middle New Jersey, or southern New Jersey. but more importantly, they can get this access to the information we're sharing through Stockton University's website, because we're going to teach these online, right, Rob?
Absolutely. So they can go to Stockton University, and you can actually just put in the word cannabis in the search box, and you'll find our 4 credit classes. And then you'll also find all the continuing education things that we do. Plus, you'll find our quarterly events. We do free quarterly panels all the time. We do career fairs. We have a lot of things going on. So it's a good way to keep up with us in that regard. And we are in Southern Jersey. We actually have a campus in Atlantic City, and then we have one in Galloway, which is 10 minutes away. So we are primarily a state school, about 10,000 students, and we are Southern Jersey.
Yeah. And by the way, what you just said to do, going to the Stockton University website and searching cannabis, I did. And I was so proud to see getting to normalization, changing the stigma of cannabis through public relations, taught by this professor, Jimmy Young. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited to see it at the top after that search. And but anyway, if you're interested in getting into my class, please feel free to go to Stockton U, search cannabis, and sign up. Today, tomorrow, not sure when you're watching this, but we do want you to at least check out what's going on with cannabis studies at Stockton University. And I'm pretty sure the rest of the Green Rush Live show on this particular Friday will have more in the Rob Mejia show, if you will, because I'm pretty sure I think I nicknamed you Professor Weed. I think that was one of the first things I asked you. Are you Professor Weed, Rob, right? Angela's laughing. Isn't he Professor Weed, Angela? When you get right down to it, right? Come on. We
Yeah,
need
it's
to
all right.
brand, we
I'll
need to
take it.
brand him, send out public relations, and build that out. Professor Weed, Rob Mejia, or hey, the fact that I'm actually teaching a cannabis course after years of being in sports and broadcasting and multimedia journalism and all that, to me, that's really amazing. That to me, that's like, we really have made it this far. We've made a lot of progress, Angela, haven't we?
We absolutely have. And it's an exciting time to be working in and around cannabis.
There you go. So for Professor Angela Speakman, Professor Rob Mejia, and Professor Jimmy Young, we thank you for joining us here on Green Rush Live on this Friday. Don't go away, because we've got more educational discussion with Rob and other members of the Stockton University faculty. That's what we're going to be doing over the next few hours. So again, thank you for watching Green Rush Live. Thank you again for joining us, Angela and Rob, and we'll see you in the classroom at some point. We'll have more from Green Rush Live after this. It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product.
Both cool the smoke from 1300 degrees to just 90 into your lungs. Plus, the maze pipe and pre-roll filters get rid of all the gunk that you just don't want in your lungs if you can help it.
Add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
We are a cultivation through to consumption lifestyle brand for the cannabis industry. Of course, the crown jewel in our product line is the Armoire home grow system. So now with Green Goddess Supply, we can take you everywhere from growing it in the Armoire right through to storing it, consuming it, rolling it, storing it, you name it, A to Z. Our goal is to enable everybody and anybody anywhere to be able to produce their own organic flower quickly, easily, discreetly, and inexpensively.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Safetiva Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Safetiva understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Safetiva Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to safetiva.com. The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Cannatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at cannatrols.com.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, a podcast and video interview show that is distributed on all the popular podcast platforms like iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, iHeart. We are also available on video platforms and social media on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, as well as our own website, procannabismedia.com, and our flagship affiliate, cannabis.net. Now, today on the program, we welcome Rob Mejia, an adjunct professor and author from the great state of New Jersey. I believe that's the Garden State. His expertise, everyone's favorite weed, cannabis sativa. Well, Rob Mejia joins us now from New Jersey. And Rob, I got to ask you, as an adjunct professor at a university in New Jersey, do your students call you Professor Weed?
No, they usually just call me Professor Rob or just Rob or Professor Mejia. But outside of the classroom, you can imagine my friends call me all kinds of things.
I'm sure. Can you explain a little bit about, first of all, our community harvest? Because I know you're involved with that group as well. Tell me a little bit about our community harvest.
I'd be happy to. Our community harvest, a cannabis education company, is exactly what the name says. What we do is we create cannabis education material for all kinds of different entities. That can be anything from infographics to online courses to brochures to in-person seminars. You name it, we do it. I like to think that I know a little bit about cannabis in a lot of different areas and go deep enough just to get somebody interested so they can really do some further research on their own if they want.
Are these online courses available to everybody? In other words, if I wanted to take your course, could I just go online, log in, probably pay a tuition fee and sign up?
Actually, no, it doesn't work that way. What we do is we have actually built an online course for Stockton University, where I am an adjunct professor. And that's kind of how I started my relationship to really get in there to become a professor, is that my company built a course on careers in cannabis. So we focused on the cannabis industry, jobs. It had resources like sample resumes, cover letters, websites you can go to, all kinds of good information for people from the community who wanted to take the class. What happened was Stockton was offering a minor in cannabis studies, and people in the community saw that and said, wow, I really want to take that medical cannabis class, or I want to take the law in cannabis or the business in cannabis, but they couldn't because they were not enrolled students. And those classes, as you can imagine, get filled up very, very quickly. So what happened is Stockton decided to build a whole suite of classes in their continuing education department and offer a certificate in cannabis studies. So you could, as just a member of the public, go to the Stockton continuing ed department and sign up and take one class, 2, 3, 4, or 5 and get a full certificate. And my class is one of those 5 that's there.
Okay, that's great. Now, I got to ask you, first of all, how long has Stockton University had a cannabis minor or concentration of study?
It's only been a couple of years, really since about 2018. I mean, it's been in the planning stages for quite some time. And I know that you work at colleges. And so you know what happens as far as having to propose a class, a curriculum. It has to go through a lot of hands. You have to have a lot of buy-in. And I really have a lot of admiration for the people at Stockton who are smart enough and tenacious enough first of all, to get it through, because they were one of the very first universities to have a minor in cannabis studies. So they'd been working on that for a few years, but back in 2018, we had our first class that started to come through, and now we're actually getting graduates. And I'm happy to say we had 6 graduates this year, and I know 3 of them are employed.
Oh, that's the best news, because you and I both know, I'm guessing we're age appropriate. When you go to college, the whole idea, besides to enjoy yourself, is to actually get enough education so that you can get hired once you graduate. And I'm guessing that skills like you offer in your course make these kids even more hireable, especially in the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. The very nice thing is that these students can actually major in anything. So I have students who are communication majors, public health, exercise science. There's some writing majors, you name it, marketing, MBAs. I mean, there's a lot of people in business in there too. And whatever major they have, then they take this suite of 5 classes to get a cannabis minor. So the nice part is, if you are a communications major, not only do you know how do you work with integrated media, but now you know how it affects cannabis, and you have cannabis knowledge. So when you walk into a vertical operation, for example, not only are you there to run their social media or to do their other kind of writing or whatever they want you to do as a communications major, but you come in there with cannabis knowledge, so you are ready to go.
Speaking of cannabis knowledge, Rob, where did you get your cannabis knowledge?
Well, it's a story that is probably fairly typical. It started with a family member and with health concerns. So the background is that I'm one of 13 kids. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. Yeah, exactly. Huge family.
What's in the water? I know it's in the air there, but holy mackerel, that's 13 kids. Wow. Okay, that's great.
So there was always something to do at the Mejia household. But a few years ago, it's probably been, oh boy, we're going on close to a decade now. My older sister, Teresa, unfortunately got uterine cancer. And when she got uterine cancer, she was out in Cleveland, and I went to go see her quite often. And I kept wondering, for her pain, why no one ever offered her medical cannabis, because she was on no pharma before. She was healthy. She ate well. She was a good jogger, all those nice things. And then they put her on pharma. And when she was on pharma, she got pretty confused, disoriented, and it only partially helped with her pain. And then she also started wasting away. She really lost her appetite. And so I kept thinking, why are they not offering her medical cannabis? We know it works well for pain, and we know it works well to stimulate appetite. And so that question really stuck with me. Unfortunately, my sister passed before we could really have a chance to find out how it could help her. But I thought to myself, well, I still have 11 siblings. I'm still here. My parents are still here. And I would like to know in the future, if there's a similar situation, I would like some knowledge so I can help the people around me that I love. So that's really how I started researching, and having a background in education and just being a curious person. I really dove in and I read every book I could get my hands on. I started calling people in the industry. I went to events. I watched videos. You name it, I really dove into it. And that's all I did for quite some time. I have other businesses, and I really put a lot of my efforts towards learning about cannabis. And then when I popped my head up after many years of study, I originally thought I wanted to write a cannabis cookbook and to really focus on cooking with cannabis for people who needed it medically. But I found that there was such a dearth of baseline knowledge that I thought I really need to become a Cannabis 101 guy. So let me focus on education that I already know how to do, and let me jump in there. And so that's why I wrote my books. That's why I started my education company. And that's really why I am here today.
And let's talk about those books. One, I believe, is called The Essential Cannabis Book, a field guide for the curious, and The Essential Cannabis Journal, and Personal Notes from the Field. Now, that is something I probably could have written. I just want to say. Did a lot of field research. And here's the other question I got to ask you, Rob. Is there a lab component to your class? I had to do it. I had to do it.
Backing up for a moment, you're totally right. Those are the titles of the books, The Essential Cannabis Book and Essential Cannabis Journal. And they really, again, function as 101 introductions. So they have definitions and terms. It covers history, methods of consumption. It covers social issues, racial issues. It covers a little bit of politics. And then there is a section on, surprise, cooking with cannabis. So there's a couple chapters on how to have cannabis dinner parties, how to dose, and I squeezed in 40 recipes. And then I also found stories from people in the cannabis community. So I have 20 small interviews from people who are either medical patients, dispensary owners, growers, just interesting people in the industry, and their stories are incorporated. And I did that because I thought once somebody hears a personal story from someone, it really breaks down the stigma. Once I hear from my neighbor that CBD is helping them, for example, all of a sudden that opens up my mind a little bit. And I thought these stories of real people with real issues would sort of help solve some of that stigma as well. So that's why I wrote my book, and that's kind of the level of the book. And then the journal is for people who are either coming back to cannabis, probably people of our age who may have tried it as, sometime in high school, college, or whatever, but want to become more responsible users. And also for people who really want to use it for medical purposes, and you want to track your consumption and really find out what works, what the right dose is, and again, just to be your own health advocate. As far as a lab component in my class, we do try to do a lot of activities that gets us out in the field well before COVID, but we were looking at things like taking some tours. We had a bunch of guest speakers. We had to analyze political stance. We were actually on a podcast for Brave New Weed as a class. So really, I try to bring in all kinds of interaction in the class. They don't just need to hear me yap for an hour about cannabis, even though that can sometimes be interesting.
I know it's interesting because I've already spent at least an hour on the phone with you earlier. But I do want to go back to the class and the college. Does the college require that they all be over the age of 21, or how does that work?
For my class in particular, well, one of them, I teach two classes there. I teach the preparation for cannabis internship class, and that's really to get students prepared to get an internship. And I make a bunch of connections with people who are hiring, and then also to help them get a job too, because I do have a few people who graduate. So there is a prerequisite that people in that class have to be a junior or a senior. And I do tell them up front, if you're getting an internship, if it has anything to do with touching the plant, or even going into a dispensary, you have to be 21. So your internship might be remote if you are under 21. So if you're a 19 or a 20-year-old, you may do some marketing research and you may do some writing or something like that. But in order to be in the location or to touch the plant, obviously you have to be 21. And that's one of the things we cover kind of early on in the class.
Well, that's good. And that's very responsible of you as an instructor too, because, there's always that, you mentioned the stigma. You understand it. We lived it. We live it if you're in this space every day. Can you give me an example of the challenges that you faced when you brought it out as an educational component that you wanted to enlighten people about this amazing plant?
I would have to say, actually, taking the education perspective, that I've actually gotten very little pushback. That by and large, people at least understand that we need to know about this. It is something in our world. It's something that's coming. We have a big election coming up in November where a number of states are going to legalize either medically or adult use or both. But if you look at the percentage of people who live in states where it's medically legal, adult use legal, I mean, it's the majority of our population. And so even people who might have some real issues, and I do get the same 5 questions over and over and over again. So I can't tell you how many times I've responded to, is it addictive? Is it a gateway drug? What about the kids? I mean, you kind of get those over and over again, but it's fine. And I know part of my function is to go ahead and answer those questions and to do it in a responsible manner. But as an educator, I really don't get much pushback. I haven't really had many people who said, what you're doing is either wrong or wrong-headed or whatever. I think they listen to me and they know what I'm doing, and I've only pretty much gotten support.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And education, science, and research has really driven this whole green wave of movement throughout this country towards legalization in some states. I'm obviously coming from my native state of Massachusetts, where it was voted in 2016 as an adult use product, but the medical program has been around since 2013, and I qualified because of my 4 surgeries in 20 years and the various arthritic issues that I have with my body. Getting a medical card really wasn't difficult for someone who had a qualifying condition. But as you know, in a lot of these states, the definition of what a qualifying condition is still up for debate in many of these states. Has any of the New Jersey legislators reached out to you to learn more about what is going on with this plant?
Only a few people, which unfortunately I'm a little disappointed with. I did try to engage with my local congressperson, who happens to be very conservative. I actually live in a very highly Republican district, and my local representative is very anti-cannabis. But what's interesting is we both spoke to the same seniors group. And so I spoke to the seniors group, and then he came along about a month later. And of course, our take on cannabis was quite different. One of the people from the senior center contacted me and said, he's interested in learning more about cannabis. Would you reach out to him? And so I did many times, and I never got a single response. So he clearly didn't want to engage. But I have had the opportunity since then. I was on a panel with the local Democrats here who just had a general session on cannabis, and there was an attorney on the panel. I was there. There was a dispensary owner. There was head of security, and it was a good panel. It was kind of a general discussion. And then also recently, right before New Jersey primaries, just about a week ago, I was on a panel near Atlantic City with candidate Bridget Harrison, who was running for South Jersey District 2. Unfortunately, she came up short with Amy Kennedy, but she had a very progressive stance on cannabis, and I actually know her through the publishing world. And so I did, of course, was able to involve myself with her campaign, at least to a minor level. But I am hoping that New Jersey legislators will get smarter and come to me, and we'll talk.
Legislators, politicians get smarter?
Jimmy, I'm always hopeful. What can I say?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm an optimist.
And I don't, look, I grew up in the 60s, okay? And, I looked up to the figures that were in office until crazy people took shots at them, I know it affected me for the rest of my life that JFK, who of course was, part of Massachusetts' history, RFK, and Dr. Martin Luther King. These three guys, songs have been written about them, let's just say, I'm not going to sing, but these three guys, had they lived, would have changed the direction of this country early on. And it seems that we have turned back the clock now over the last few months because of COVID and the lack of leadership and the lack of knowledge that you have about this virus, plus the effect that it's had on people of color in this country. Again, another example of what the white man has done to the black man in this country. It has reared its ugly head again. Is there a silver lining? Can cannabis be a cure to perhaps give back to the diverse community that has been mostly affected, more affected than the white person as far as COVID goes, and also just as far as what we've done to those people over the last 50 years or so?
First, I want to say your summary about where we are now is excellent. You've said it perfectly, that it does feel like we are back again, that we have not made any progress since about 1970 or wherever you want to look at it. And actually, at some of the protests I've been at, I do see some people carrying signs, and it says something like, "I can't believe I'm doing this again. I'm back
Right.
at it again." And it is so true that it does feel like history is really repeating itself, and we have not made much progress in many years.
Rob, I wanted to just, you're 100% right on that. And I don't know about you, but in 5th grade, I remember singing "We Shall Overcome" someday, thinking that perhaps in 5th grade, you'd think by the time I'm 62, we would have made some progress. Very frustrating time.
Yeah, absolutely. And towards your point about cannabis possibly being part of the solution, I think we have a good opportunity, but I'm also worried about the way that it's going. So I know there are so many people in the industry who do acknowledge up front that we do need to have some programs for social and racial equality and progress. But even in the states that are trying to do it, Illinois, Massachusetts, and those that have made it really kind of a centerpiece of their policies, unfortunately, what's happening is you're still seeing the big multi-state operators get more of the licenses, and you're not seeing as many of the smaller people get involved. I mean, what I would love to see is a model kind of like the Hood Incubator in outside of Oakland. And what they do is it's an MBA female-led program, people of color. And what they've done is they actually offer people in the community real skills, access to money, and knowledge to get them in the cannabis industry. So they'll teach them how to write a business plan. They'll show them where they can go to get money. They'll educate them on the basics of cannabis. They'll teach them about medical cannabis. They'll teach them how to be a good employee as a wellness coordinator or what they call a bud tender. But they give all these skills out to people in the community who were harmed by the war on drugs. And that way, I think like reaching individual people and actually helping them and putting them in a position to contribute, that to me seems marvelous. The state programs are trying, but sometimes what happens is equity candidates end up 30 of them in a classroom and they get a lecture about cannabis. Not saying that's not valuable, not saying it's not a little bit of progress. At least you have a target audience, at least you're trying. But I think you almost need little incubators, either privately run or run by the government, to actually give those people a stake in the cannabis industry and to help them get going. Another great example of what I thought was a good policy was up in Maine, and unfortunately they've abandoned this, but in Maine, what they were going to do is you had to be a resident for at least 4 years, put in your taxes 4 years in a row, in order for you to qualify for a license. That opened up things to all these smaller players. And also, if you were a multi-state operator, you could not apply for a license for 2 years. So that gave the small craft growers a 2-year head start to get in there, to start going, to establish their brand name. And I thought that's a great thing, because then you can have people who are not multimillionaires, who can't raise a crazy amount of money to get in the business, but to develop a nice, small, high quality farm organic product that then they could sell to the public. But I was so sorry to see Maine go away from that. I thought that was a smart idea that I'm sorry was not pursued.
It's interesting. I spent 11 years in Maine. It's my second home, if you will. I started my sportscaster career in Portland, Maine at the CBS affiliate from 81 to 92. And I still have a lot of dear friends in the state of Maine. And just recently, I released an interview that I did with a caregiver. Now, the caregiver program in Maine was really designed for the person who needed medicinal cannabis and to find someone who would home craft, grow it themselves, and then put it all together and share it with those who were most in need. You mentioned the multi-state operator. Think about the regulations that have been put in place by the various states and how difficult it is to launch a new business in an industry that is as highly regulated as the cannabis industry. I know that people point fingers at multi-state operators all the time, but I got to tell you, I don't know what else they could have done. I mean, I like what you're saying in a realistic world. Yeah, the natives, the locals, the mom and pops, that would be great, and I'd like to still see that. But in reality, when you're dealing with the regulations and the laws, new laws in most cases, so you got to be ready to pay some lawyers, because you know what happens when people get upset and feel like they've been, committed, people have been taken advantage of in some capacity. They're going to sue, which means, to me, once again, that the best investment in this business is in a law firm. But seriously, the multi-state operator is just operating and doing business within a structure that they have to work within. So it's almost like, and now granted, a lot of these MSOs, I get it. They're trying to get more than 3 licenses, which is the limit. So they restructure their deal and they become a management company as opposed to an owner. That's the American way of doing capitalism in business. I mean, I'm defending the MSO because I don't think there would be a cannabis business in this country if we didn't have the kind of money that they have put into this industry to start it.
Yeah, I think you do make a good point. I mean, that is also what's kind of limiting all of our progress, because in so many people that I've interviewed, because I'm also I'm a magazine columnist too for Ever Cannabis magazine. And I try to find interesting people in the business. And I have found a few people who are tenacious enough to get through the regulations. But when I hear their story, it is just phenomenal how much time that they had to put in themselves to learn about these regulations. And then they still had to use attorneys, but they used them as little as they could. But if you have muscled through, but I understand that if you're not equipped to do that, the chances of you getting through are not good. And I will also say that there are some multi-state operators who I think are very good citizens. For example, there's a company called Justice Grown here in New Jersey. And I've been pretty impressed with them because part of their whole platform is they are trying to engage with people who have been incarcerated, who are coming out, and they're trying to employ them. I also know they're trying to work on expungement too. So at least as a corporation, they are trying to give people a chance who have been harmed by the war on drugs. So I know there are some good multi-state operators. And to your point, I know you need a lot of expertise and a lot of talent and a lot of money to get through all these regulations. And until we can make cannabis regulated like almost any other business, that I think we're going to continue to kind of limp along the way we are right now.
Yeah, I don't know if it will ever be like any other business just because of the multitude of uses of this plant that can be grown in your backyard. You know, at least Massachusetts is offering the opportunity for homeowners to grow 6 plants per adult in one dwelling, which gives you 12 plants, which I've talked to growers, that's quite a lot of weed to grow. In fact, it's probably enough to, I don't know, share it with others, gift it to others, let's just say. So again, I guess where I want to go with this next point is, are you seeing more interest in the growing factor or the operating of a business factor? Where do you see a lot of the growth and interest in the cannabis, those in your classes that have taken it? Where exactly is their passion point?
It's interesting. I think it's actually pretty well spread amongst the students. So I do have a certain contingent that absolutely are interested in growing. That's what they want to do. I have some who are interested in the operations. I have some who want to work in dispensaries. I have a few who want to go off on their own business and start their own thing. I have several who are very interested in hospitality, which is interesting, that they want to cook with cannabis. They want to do a bud and breakfast at some day, or they want to do live events, sports events, those kind of things. So there's a lot of different interests in the class. I mean, the one thing I will point out to them is that in terms of growing, at least domestically, right now that you have the vertical operation, so they grow, they process, and they sell. But at some point, there's going to be national legalization. When that happens, and we can even import internationally, can you imagine a grower who's in Massachusetts or New Jersey try to compete with a grower from Colombia, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama? Their product will be so much cheaper and probably so much better, unless there's a unique strain that the people in Jersey or Massachusetts come up with. So my prediction, and we'll see if this will bear me out correctly in the future, is that the grows will be less valuable than the dispensaries. I think the dispensaries are king because you'll always need a retail place that's regulated, that's safe, that's secure, that has tested product for you to go to. So if you have a dispensary, I think you're in good shape. If you have a grow and you only have a grow, it's not part of a vertical, I think it's going to be interesting to see what'll happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. That I think then you're going to see more logistics. You're going to see importing, and you're going to see maybe some more lab testing here before it gets to our dispensaries. But I think the crown jewel is really that working in the dispensaries and doing that part of the operation. And the grow part, I think you'll have to be clever in order to keep it going once you have that international competition.
Yeah, a great point. And it does seem to be that the vertical, those who do control the seed to sale activities and process, if you will, are the ones that seem to be the most stable. They seem to be getting the most investment dough. I also see companies like High Times trying to get into the verticals because everything else they've tried has not gone very well. And then I see the imports are starting to grow and exports out of Canada into Germany, into Israel, into other countries. Eventually, this product will become traded in the futures market because you grow it in the ground. There'll be a wholesale price. Therein lies another element to your class. You're going to have to get into commodities and futures and learning how to trade the wholesale price and to see what is going to go up and down. Think about that in 5 to 10 years, right?
You're exactly correct. And I'm going to have to find a good speaker for that part because that's not my forte. But I'm sure I'll find somebody.
I know somebody you could talk to, and it's not me, by the way. Okay. But I know somebody who's an expert in the commodities world, in the futures world. And he's a very direct relative, and I know that he is not pro-cannabis. So in that case, it might be an interesting person to get into your class in some capacity.
That sounds exactly right. I wanted to jump back real quickly again to your question about growing. So we talked sort of about growing as a profession. I wanted to jump back and talk about growing as kind of a hobby. So the one thing that we've, of course, seen all these trends during COVID, you're seeing so many people who are cooking. If you try to go into a store and buy flour or vegetable oil, vinegar, or whatever, it's been gone, and people are making sourdough, presumably for some reasons. But people are also picking up hobbies, and one of them is growing. So there is a boom of interest in learning how to grow a single plant or a couple plants, like you said, as a home grower. And I am seeing a lot of activity, especially on the internet, and there is such good information about growing. And there's people who can help you do your first outdoor grow if you want to be a little more ecologically forward thinking and not spend a ton of money on electricity, which you can, and water and nutrients and everything else. And there's other growers who will teach you how to grow indoors with special lights and special closets and all kinds of things. The growers are so passionate and smart and good that if you want to engage with any of them and learn about growing, there is such good material out there, just a wealth of material.
And let me ask you, as an educator, the growers believe they know everything. You know that, right?
I think some of them do. Yes,
they are fascinating people.
Theories.
You know, you know, there's so many interesting people and so many fascinating parts of this industry. I have been overwhelmed, and I'm extremely enthused about the amount of knowledge that I have consumed over the last 2.5 years. Since I decided to give this a shot. And I've met some really interesting people. But the thing that is very consistent about the people that I meet, they all know that they're part of history. And they all know that the plant has played some kind of special role in their lives. And you told a very personal story about why you decided to learn more about this plant. And it's the people that say to you, cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life. And I wish I had $1 for every time I've heard that, because then I know I would have the kind of investment I need to really build out this network. But how many times have you heard people say that to you?
I'm with you. That's actually one of the things that kept me going in the early days, because when I would call people, and granted, I do have a background in sales, so I have a slightly thick skin, so I'm, used to some people not returning calls and that sort of thing. But the people in the cannabis industry were so gracious with their time and so helpful. And I did hear these dramatic stories over and over again. And I thought, just think, wouldn't that be dramatic if I could actually be part of this and I could actually help some people, which of course was my motivation starting up front. And I thought, well, if I can spread that and help out dozens, hundreds, thousands, I mean, wouldn't that be a pretty magnificent thing to do? And I would like to do that. But to your point, I do hear nearly every day somebody that says, oh yes, this has helped me in this particular way. And in some ways, great and small. I mean, I have heard a few cancer patients talk about what it's done for them. And of course, that is a whole different area. But then I've also heard people as simple as some of the aging athletes that I play tennis with. And I've gotten some of them to start using CBD, and they swear by it. Aches and pains are going away. They're playing more often. They're more comfortable. And that makes a big difference. I mean, if sports is one of your passions and you're limited, and now you can finally go out and do it more often, more comfortably, that makes a big difference in how you feel and how you look at things. So I think it is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that is another thing you and I have in common. We discovered this, and we're both tennis enthusiasts. And I think I did share with you one of the greatest moments of my life is when I got to hit the ball against Rocket Rod Laver. Very, very special in the 80s, being able to pull that one off. And just so you know, that little scoreboard, that was totally fabricated. We only played one game, okay?
I was impressed by the scoreboard. I'm sorry you told me that. And the one very quick tennis story I'll add is that when I was growing up, I was part of the National Junior Tennis League, which was an effort by Arthur Ashe and others to bring tennis to urban communities. And so I played on their teams. I was a good little player, so I got to go to this little regional qualifier, and at that event, Arthur Ashe was there, along with like 5 other pros, and so I actually got to shake hands with Arthur Ashe, and I won a tennis racket.
That's fantastic. So as a kid, I got to go to the Lungwood Cricket Club and watch Arthur Ashe play. Nice. Bob Lutz and Stan Smith played doubles. Some woman by the name of Billie Jean Moffitt hit the ball as well. And I do want to go back to something you talked about at the very beginning, about one of the objections that keeps coming up about the kids. Now, as a kid myself, way back when, I knew a lot more about cannabis by doing than my parents did, okay? And I'm guessing that even today, in some legal states or illegal states, there are certain high schoolers out there that know more about the cannabis plant than their adults. But I do want to go back to education. In Europe, they don't have as many alcoholics in Europe as they do in the United States, where we do not allow people under the age of 21 to drink alcohol. Now, you and I both know that there are plenty of people under the age of 21 who are drinking alcohol in high school to excess, and it is a very dangerous thing to do. As someone who has worked with young people most of my life, I worry about that a lot. Now, Mothers Against Drunk Driving has done a great job of at least allowing us to understand that the dangers of operating a vehicle like that under the influence of alcohol is extremely, extremely dangerous. And I remember doing a story on a young man in Maine who had a full baseball scholarship to the University of Miami, celebrated in his Camaro, and drove it into a tree and died. Okay, so these stories are out there about the dangers of alcohol, and the education helped young people understand that indeed it is dangerous to operate a vehicle under the influence of alcohol. There's a lot of debate in this country about operating under the influence of cannabis. It is not the same thing. However, it is indeed something that is banned from the under 21-year-old in this country. My point about Europe is they bring young people up early on in their lives, in their 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old lives, with wine and understanding more about alcohol. They're actually taught about the dangers of alcohol in their own families, in their homes. So as an educator, can't that be done here in the United States as well?
I think it can, but the difficulty would be we certainly have a lot of adults that we would have to educate, and they would have to be open to being educated. So I think to your point that their kids actually, in some ways, probably know more than they do. I mean, actually, I can guarantee you that that a high school kid knows more about vaping than probably 95% of adults, because they've grown up with it and they've seen it and they know, and they use it in high school and everything else. Whereas adults, it's been pretty new to us, and we've had to learn from the ground up. There was no vaping when we were growing up, but there certainly is now, and it's certainly kind of a big deal. So I think there's a couple things. One is, I think over time that adults will kind of loosen up, and they'll realize that for better or worse, if they have an objection to it, they know that they'll have to know something about it, because they'll want to tell their kids, or hopefully they'll entrust someone like you or me to tell their kids about it. Totally fine, totally happy talking to them about that and giving them the real facts about what's going on. So I do think that we are seeing change year by year, even day by day, and especially as we're able to start doing some research, as more of the medical information comes out, as hemp becomes more of just a common fiber like anything else. I think all of that is going to start to chip at the stigma, and it already is a little bit, to the point where I think most people will be willing to share information with their kids. And then also kids on their own, again, with the internet, they can find out information. If they're a little bit curious, they can find some really good sources.
And better than their parents. But I will say this, Rob, and you and I probably won't be around to see it. The kids that are in high school now, the kids that are growing up with it being a legal commodity, and that there was a recent, I know you know this study in Colorado, as they look back at the 10 years of it being legal, that the youth use of cannabis has actually gone down in legal states. And it's because it's not taboo anymore. At least this is my opinion, okay? I believe it's not taboo anymore. So the kids aren't that interested in trying it out behind the back of the parents and all that stuff. You know, that's what parents put parameters on their children. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And as a child, for the most part, you want to push that envelope of what they're telling you you can't do. If that stove is hot, you don't know what hot is until you touch it, right?
Yeah.
So again, my point is, in a state where it's legal, use has actually gone down amongst teens in Colorado. And to me, again, That goes to the power of education, and also the power of, hey, guess what? It's an adult product just like alcohol, so you are going to have to wait. You don't have to sneak around to do it. Just wait, get educated, and when you are old enough to handle it and use it responsibly, you'll have access to it. And then when those kids become parents, then perhaps we can finally lower that adult age down to 19 or even 20. You know, when I was growing up, it was 18. And of course, it turned to 21 when I turned to 21, just saying. But it's a different mentality now. And again, I believe, I lean on that side. I really do believe that cannabis is far less dangerous than alcohol. And I hope that parents will take the time to educate themselves. Perhaps take your course, Rob.
I hope so. The one thing that Colorado did, I think that was pretty smart, and I wonder if it's contributed to the reduction in use, is that as part of their tax money that they were getting from cannabis, they have a youth education program that's in the schools. And I know the person who provides the education, actually, to some of the schools. So I've read through their curriculum. The curriculum is pretty good. I do have a couple objections. There were a couple alarmist things in there, but for the most part, I thought about 90% of it was excellent and pretty straightforward and factual. And I wonder if that's part of the reason, plus what you said, that it's also just becoming more normalized. They're driving by dispensaries. They know what the age is. It's not the illicit sort of fun thing they might want to sneak off on their own for. That I do think all those things have kind of impacted it.
Well, I'll tell you what, Rob Mejia, I know I could sit and talk with you for hours, but unfortunately, I think this has been a really good example of what people can find out about your course. And again, if you want to learn more about it and perhaps take this course, how do you do that, Rob? And continuing education is where I'm going on this.
Go to Stockton University, go to their continuing education department, and then you'll see the list of courses there. The one shortcut that I will give to your listeners, and this is a free resource, is on August 1st, 2019, I did a webinar for Georgetown University, which is my alma mater, and it was on careers in cannabis. It's an hour and 17 minutes, but if you want to get in the business, I think it's well worth it, especially if you're new. So the first part of the course, first part of the webinar goes over basic definitions. It goes over history, methods of consumption, where it's legal in what particular state, where it's decriminalized, a lot of good information. And then I actually go through different careers in cannabis. So I go through growing, processing, dispensary operations, back-end support, web design, photography, hospitality, health careers, hemp. And then there's resources too. There's salary ranges, qualifications, sample cover letters. So if you want to get in the cannabis industry, it's a good free resource. And just look at Georgetown University Career Services YouTube and look up Rob Mejia and you'll see it pop up.
There you go. Hey, Rob Mejia, I think you do a great job. I think your students are very lucky. I wish you good luck this fall. You know, I didn't get into the whole COVID thing as an instructor, but I'm going to guess you have some reservations about going back into the classroom this fall, yes?
Actually, my classes are, one is a hybrid course, so we're only supposed to meet on Mondays, and the rest is online. And then my second course, which is Introduction to Medical Cannabis, is strictly online. So I'm good on that. Good. I'm a little hesitant to go back to the class, but I want to make sure that as long as we have separation, that I'll be fine. Otherwise, we'll do our first few classes online as well, and then I'll see if it's safe. And if it feels like it's safe, then I'll go in. Otherwise, both of my courses will be online, and it will be up to me to make sure that it's engaging, interesting, and interactive, which is a lot more work.
Yes, it is. And someone who's taught a few online courses, I know how important that is as well. Rob Mejia, thank you so much for joining us on In the Weeds this week. And we look forward to perhaps hearing from you again as more and more educational issues come up. I think you're going to be my go-to source for this because I was so impressed with your knowledge and how you talk about the amazing plant that is the cannabis sativa plant. So for Rob Mejia, I'm Jimmy Young, the host of In the Weeds. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Coming up on Weed Talk News this week, Minnesota is still waiting on their governor to sign their legalization bill, making them the 23rd legal state for adult use. Plus, a pathogen is eating up healthy cannabis plants all over the country and making them worthless. And New York State's legal market continues to grow, but zoning becomes a real challenge in upstate. In Massachusetts, the commissioners abandoned a pilot program for social cannabis clubs while promising to create a social club license with new regulations. And New Jersey opens up more dispensaries, including Nova Farms, based in Massachusetts. And one of the most successful medical dispensaries in the Bay State for the past 10 years, Red Clinics, finally gets an adult use license for their Somerville location. All that and coast-to-coast cannabis news coverage on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News for another week. I'm Elena Pinto. All is relatively quiet on the federal reform front as the debt ceiling debate continues to dominate Congress. There seems to be some optimism that the safe banking bill might actually get their day on the Senate floor, and indications now are that it will pass, but amendments could still derail it. Andrew Beringer has the latest on that, plus that evil pathogen that is eating up flower crops from coast to coast.
Andrew Beringer here from Washington, D.C., reporting for Weed Talk News. Quick updates on a couple things across the board on the federal level in Maryland and Virginia area. First off, the Safe Banking Act and an update. Not a lot going on currently. It's still making its way through the congressional session, and we are still crossing our fingers and hoping for the best outcome. Now, we are waiting because of the June 1st update to the budget of the government. We will have to see and report next week to see if there's any updates with the Safe Banking Act. Second, a large cannabis pathogen is destroying crops mainly in California right now, but they say that a lot of this pathogen is covering across the country in many states, and that we have to be aware of it because as of right now, California states that this pathogen is in 90% of their crops. Does not sound good. Lastly, in Maryland, a bill that says cops are unable to pull you over, search, seizure, or have probable cause due to the smell of cannabis alone. Now, probably imagining that can be a little iffy. How does one say, oh, we'll pull you over for just smell alone? Because guess what? Cannabis and hemp smell exactly the same when you consume it. That's all I have for We Talk News. Reporting from Washington, D.C., this is Andrew Beringer.
One of the biggest challenges facing the cannabis industry, besides the fact that it is still illegal at the federal level, is where to place dispensaries in new legal states. Regulations prohibit visible locations near schools or even another dispensary in the same area, and that pushes many of them deep in industrial parks. Corning, New York, a city of just over 10,000 people, is 4.5 hours from New York City in a central part of the state. In March, Union Chill was awarded a conditional license from the state for a location approved by the Office of Cannabis Management. They thought they would be welcomed in that town since when given the opportunity to opt out before December 2021, Corning did not. On May 1st, local politicians there imposed a new zoning rule that dispensaries had to be located a minimum of 500 feet from community facilities. That change in zoning rules all but ended Union Chill's attempts to open a dispensary in that town. This is a familiar story in new cannabis legal states where many dispensaries are located in less than desirable locations deep in industrial parks. Another sign of the challenges facing this new industry all over the U.S. But in Michigan, no problem with zoning now, but that state has other issues, as Rick Thompson explains in his Michigan Cannabis Report.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. A monumental court case went to trial last week, but we know very little about it. In 2021, the Cannabis Regulatory Agency issued what was at that time the largest cannabis recall in American history, the target of which was Viridis Laboratories. The regulators claimed the testers were not properly screening cannabis for microbials and were engaging in THC potency inflation. The evidence they provided was pretty sound: eyewitness reports of undercounted microbial samples and the use of an unapproved method of testing for THC. Viridis sued and won a limited decision, which sent about half of the recalled products back onto Michigan retail shelves. The damage was done, however, and Viridis sued the regulators, claiming they knew the recall was bogus. In the lawsuit, Viridis named at least 4 government employees as personally responsible for the recall and that they used personal bias in targeting Viridis. That suit began last week, but is shrouded in mystery because the judge in the case has banned all media and reporters from being in the courtroom. This information blackout is within the judge's discretion, but is completely out of alignment with the public's right to know and defies the government's claims of transparent operations. The Michigan Press Association and the MLive Media Group have made requests of the court to make records and transcripts available to the public, but those requests to date have been ignored. The conduct of the state's largest cannabis testing lab and the actions of government agents should not be kept from the citizens, argues the media groups and advocates. The trial is set to conclude this week, but may run into the next. It will be months before the judge in the case releases a verdict, and even then, it's sure to be appealed. We will keep you updated. Well, the Cannabis Regulatory Agency released a set of more than 90 proposed changes to Michigan's cannabis laws, both medical and adult use. Within the proposed changes are new monthly financial reporting requirements, changes to the way special cannabis consumption events are authorized, faster reporting times for licensees who enter into the litigation, and many others. One of the more controversial proposals involves the regulatory agency refusing to renew the licenses of companies who do not pay their bills, which would be a first in the industry. There is great confusion about how this non-payment reporting would occur and to what degree the CRA has the authority to deny licenses for poor financial performance. Those proposed rule changes will be reviewed and debated over the course of the summer, and many of the government's suggested fixes will probably never be implemented. Stay with Weed Talk News, and we'll keep you in the know on these topics and others as the discussions progress. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
What do first class funk, grapple pie, and grape gas all have in common? If you know your cultivars, you would know they are all cannabis strain names. Now, these sun-grown strains will be available at one of Arizona's largest distributors, Copper State Farms. Even though they are vertically integrated, which means they control the seed to sale process, Copper State Farms will be limiting the amount grown of these special strains in order to preserve their quality. Could a craft grow inside a major grower's vertical be a trend for MSOs? Well, Karen Black has more from Arizona.
I'm Karen Black with Greenfinger Consulting. Welcome to the Arizona Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Arizona Senate Bill 1466 took another step forward, having passed the House Rules Committee 7-0 on May 15th. The measure has broad support both within and outside the legislature, and according to some, would help to reinvigorate the state's medical marijuana program, which has seen revenues decline month over month since the advent of adult use. Key provisions include reducing the cost and extending the term of medical marijuana cards and waiving the fee entirely for veterans, adding post-traumatic stress and autism disorders as qualifying conditions, codifying the use of telemedicine for MMJ appointments, and improving tracking and traceability. Additionally, the bill would make it so marijuana advertising, packaging, and branding requirements match other applicable rules and would standardize the definitions of marijuana and marijuana products across the board. Phoenix-based Item 9 Labs Corp. has announced some major changes. Short-time CEO Michael Weinberger stepped down after only about 6 months on the job. Several other C-suite changes were announced, concurrent with a restructuring plan that includes cutting expenses by $3.5 million. Mr. Weinberger will serve Item 9 Labs as a strategic advisor going forward, and board chair Doug Bowden has assumed the CEO position for now. Incidentally, the same week he lost his job, Mr. Weinberger lost his bid to be named Individual Innovative Champion of Change at AZ Big Media's 2023 Champion of Change Awards, as another candidate was declared winner at the May 18th gala. Another Phoenix-based company, Forefront Ventures, announced the departure of director Amit Patel on May 16th. The company is currently seeking his successor to chair its audit committee. That news came on the heels of the company having released its mostly positive first quarter results the day before. Forefront's 2023 first quarter revenue increased 7% over Q1 22. 3 Phoenix dispensaries celebrated anniversaries this past weekend. Harvest of Tempe, which is now part of Truly Family, and the Giving Tree both have a decade under their belts, while the Nirvana Center in the West Valley reached the 4-year mark. That's all for this week's Arizona Cannabis Report. I'm Karen Black of Greenfinger Consulting, reporting for Weed Talk News.
Driving under the influence of cannabis continues to be an issue for public safety and subsequently for law enforcement. Now, with 40 states allowing for medical cannabis, identifying people operating under the influence of their medicine is a real challenge. The question is, if you have cannabis in your system and it stays in there for 30 days, you may not be impaired while testing positive for cannabis. In Pennsylvania, a medical-only state, new legislation has been introduced to protect legitimate medical card holders from being cited for DUI, since that plant can stay in your system for a month. With more on this movement in the Keystone State, here's Maya Kristofowicz with more.
I'm Maya Kristofowicz from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. First up, Pennsylvania House members introduced a bill to protect medical cannabis users from DUIs. Under current Pennsylvania state law, a person is guilty of DUI if he or she drives with any amount of Schedule I controlled substance or its metabolite under the Controlled Substance Act in his or her blood. House Bill 983 would amend this law and treat medical cannabis patients the same as patients using a prescription medication by requiring proof of actual impairment as the basis for a DUI conviction. This legislation is essential to ensuring that patients are not being charged with the DUI for the mere presence of non-psychoactive metabolites and without proof of actual impairment. Next up, a bipartisan pair of Pennsylvania senators announced on Friday that they will soon file a bill to legalize marijuana in the Commonwealth. They said, with neighboring states, New Jersey and New York, implementing adult use, we have a duty to Pennsylvania taxpayers to legalize adult use marijuana to avoid losing out on hundreds of millions of dollars of new tax revenue and thousands of new jobs. While the bill hasn't been officially filed and the text is not yet available, the senator said that it would improve upon our proposal from last session. The bill is intended to be introduced by the end of June. Exciting time. That's a wrap from Pennsylvania. I'm Maya Kristofowicz from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From Weed Talk News, have a fabulous week.
Now that both houses of Congress in Minnesota have approved adult use, the governor there, Tim Walz, is scheduled to sign that bill next week. That would make Minnesota the 23rd adult use state in the country. Sure enough, some ancillary companies are preparing for that change. That includes Vicente Cederberg, one of the nation's most well-known cannabis law firms. This week, they opened an office in Minneapolis and named one of that state's leading advocates, Jason Tarasek, as their lead attorney for that state. Meanwhile, in Missouri, the sales keep coming, but now wholesale prices are rising because of the lack of supply for that record-setting market for a new state. Our man in Missouri is Brandon Jones. Here he is.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News, sponsored by Baker Brands. I'm out here at beautiful Waterworks Park. It's one of the most beautiful disc golf courses here in Kansas City. Lots of elevation change, beautiful, very old oak and pine trees out here. It's just a beautiful setting. And yes, thanks, Elena, for checking out the Missouri market. Yes, sales are continuing to go up and up and up, which means supply is continuing to go down and down and down. So right now we are having some issues with supply chain here in Missouri just because they didn't expect the market to take off as fast as it did, and with the actual gross amount of sales that are going on in the state from out of state residents that we've discussed previously on the show. So one thing that I would do for a tip, how I would find my dispensary to purchase from is just Google the 3 closest. Okay. Then you look at 3 different categories. I would look at flower, concentrate, and a vape. Just make sure you're getting the same brand, same exact SKU. Make sure you're actually going to look at the same 3 things at each place, and then just take a little tally. It's only going to be a total of 12 items. If you look at 4 different SKUs in 3 different locations, compare the prices, see who's not actually making you pay a little bit more than extra for not having enough supply. Most dispensaries should be charging twice what they're getting from the cost of the manufacturer. But as I've noticed here in the market, some are starting to push that a little higher. So again, what I would do is just find 3 or 4 SKUs the exact same at your 3 local closest dispensaries, see which is selling it for the best. And then they're probably going to be the same on throughout their entire menu. So that's how I would choose here with dealing with the supply chain issues, but they'll be having those issues and not being able to have cannabis here, right? So thanks again for Brandon Jones. I'm from B Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and thank you again to all of our veterans for your service and sacrifice. Have a great week.
Brandon Jones, Missouri Cannabis Report is brought to you by Baker Brands, a curated B2B marketplace for head shops and dispensaries.
In New Jersey, 3 more legal dispensaries have opened for adult use, bringing the total to 35 in the Garden State. One that is scheduled to open in July is Simply Pure in Trenton. That one is owned by a Black entrepreneur named Tahir Johnson. He could be the poster person for social equity in that state. And here's the Garden State cannabis reporter, Jill Goldsberry.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jill Goldsberry here with We Talk News New Jersey, and I'm here with the New Jersey Report. Here's what's happening. The New Jersey Cannabis Insider Awards 2023 takes place on June 8th and will recognize excellence and achievement in the New Jersey cannabis industry. The award show will return to the Carteret Performing Arts Center in Carteret, New Jersey, with a new format that includes more awards. So space is limited for this exclusive event, and tickets are actually on sale now because voting has ended. So get those tickets now. It's a dress to impress event that will include a cocktail hour, the award show, open bar, networking, late night bites, drinks, and entertainment. All the things people in the cannabis industry love, right? So winners in each category will actually be invited to a special rooftop event and after party. And we know that's going to be fun. Some of the awards to look out for are excellence in cannabis law applications, excellence in cannabis law municipal lawyers, excellence in commercial building operations, excellence in dispensary operations, excellence in consulting, and let's see, minority-owned business of the year, woman-owned business of the year. You get the point. There's a lot of awards. So get your tickets. It's happening on June 8th. In other news, in Woodbury, New Jersey, Nova Farms, which is the Northeast's largest privately owned, vertically integrated cannabis operator, is proud to announce that they're opening a flagship operation here in New Jersey. It's the first retail dispensary in Woodbury, New Jersey, opening on actually today on the 19th. And Nova is not the first, but it's the first one in New Jersey that is a non-conversion, exclusively recreational adult use dispensary. Try saying that 5 times. And according to Nova's spokesperson, New Jersey is a great example of this, and they're excited to show the New Jersey market what Nova Farms is all about. And currently, Nova has 4 other dispensaries, 3 in Massachusetts, 1 in Maine, and with 2 outdoor cultivations in Massachusetts and Maine, and 1 indoor grow facility in Rhode Island. So they also manufacture and process cannabis products in those states, and will do so in New Jersey. So look out for them. They are going to be located at 642 Montua Pike in Woodbury, New Jersey, and they will operate longer hours as well, from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. And from what I understand, Nova is an experienced retail operator that will bring its expertise to the New Jersey market. So we look out for that. Another opening coming up soon is Elevated by the Cannabis Lady Dispensary. Elevated will feature craft cannabis from local cultivators like the brand Miss Grass, who's also from New Jersey, luxury products from My Base Bud and Her Highness NYC, things like that. So if you're looking for more information on Elevated by the Cannabis Lady, they will actually be opening, soft opening in July, it looks like, this summer. Don't quote me on the date, but I was told that the soft opening is coming up in July. They're going to be located at 9 Highland Place, Maplewood, New Jersey. And feel free to go to the cannabislady.com for more information. Thanks for watching. I'm Jill Goldsberry for We Talk News New Jersey. Have a great day.
Nova Farms opened in Massachusetts, and yes, now opening in New Jersey too, but the commission decided to curtail any pilot program for cannabis social licenses in order to come up with more permanent rules and regulations for that type of license. So with more from the Bay State, here's PCM founder Jimmy Young.
I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report, sponsored by Holyoke Cannabis. When Bay State voters passed the adult use legalization ballot question back in 2016, cannabis social clubs were supposed to be part of the new market. 7 years later, the Cannabis Control Commission has never issued one license or even released regulations that will be the requirements for those establishments. Now, they've abandoned the pilot program that was in place under the first commission, but never implemented. The commission wants to make sure that when they finally issue these regulations, there would be no need for a pilot program. Just applicants for those licenses. So stay tuned in Cannabis Standard Time. It might just happen before the end of this calendar year. One of the most successful medical-only dispensaries since it opened in 2018 is Revolutionary Clinics. After applying for an adult use license for years, Revs finally was able to get one for its Broadway location in Somerville. In Connecticut, over the past week, Mark Shepard's trade show, New England Cannabis Convention, called NECAN, made its first stop in Hartford. Pretty good showing for the vendors and, of course, the interested parties.
Explain to me what this is. This is an ounce joint right here, and it's rolled with a glass funky field set. Nice.
The after parties, of course, are always fun. This one was sponsored by Connecticut. It featured raffles and a piñata supposedly looking like Harry Anslinger. You know, the guy that was the first drug czar in the U.S. during Prohibition in the 30s.
He's a New Yorker, everybody.
Cannabis Creative Group's Dan Serrard hit a home run by destroying that piñata. That was all filled with swag and other goodies. That's the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for this week, sponsored by Holyoke Cannabis. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News.
Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
In Illinois, 3 different dispensaries have to deal with unionized workers calling for a strike against Rise, where they work. With more on this, here's Cannabis Legalization News' Thomas Howard.
What's happening? It's me, Tom. You can find me at CannabisIndustryLawyer.com. I'm here for today's Illinois update in the cannabis space for Weed Talk News. First, the legislature was supposed to be adjourned last Friday. They didn't get their work done, so they need until next Wednesday, May 31st, to do that. Is cannabis still in the mix? Yes, it is, with SB 1559, sponsored by Democrat LaShawn Ford. Let's go over what this commonly called Cannabis Omnibus Bill does. First, most importantly perhaps, Craft grows would immediately start at 14,000 square feet of flowering canopy space, up from 5. Next most important, drive-through cannabis dispensaries could be coming to Illinois if the omnibus bill passes. Not only that, you also no longer need to use an odor-proof jar for transporting your cannabis. Makes sense considering that odor is no longer considered probable cause for a traffic stop in Illinois. Anything else? Perhaps? Yes. Tune in next week when we go over everything that has or has not changed with cannabis laws in Illinois. Back to you in the studio, Elena.
Out west in Oregon, there was a crackdown on illegal grows with raids of 5 illegal operations. This bust was the culmination of an investigation over the past 5 months. Those operations were all raided at the same time at 7 p.m. PST on Tuesday of this past week. 665 pounds were confiscated during the raid, and they also confiscated 630 plants. Law enforcement is now tracking down the rest of these organized operators who were exporting their cannabis to other states. And Marianne Kersagi has the rest of the stories from Oregon.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. This week, another retail chain with financial problems has made news. Chalice Farms, the third largest chain in Oregon, has petitioned the state for receivership, citing $35 million in debt to its publicly traded parent company in Canada. There are also approximately $3.7 million of trade payables that will hurt small farms and vendors owed money by Chalice. On better news, the Oregon Leaf Bowl was last weekend and highlighted some of the amazing products grown and manufactured here in the state. Winners include Green Clover Farms, High Noon, Cannabis King, Farmer's Friend, Nelson & Co., and so many more. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
Now let's turn to our international correspondents in Europe and in Canada. We start with Lex Pelger, who tells us that one of the most appealing places to visit with a history of consumption is Amsterdam. But those rules are changing. So here's Lex Pelger's European Cannabis Report.
I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creation with this week's European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Amsterdam has finally followed through on their threat and has banned the smoking of cannabis on the streets of the red light district. After a long campaign by residents complaining of quality of life issues, the move is hoping to tackle crime and antisocial behavior. Violators will first receive a warning, followed by a €100 fine. For now, tourists will still be able to smoke on the terraces of coffee shops, but the council warns that if the nuisance does not decrease sufficiently, they will look at banning smoking outside of coffee shops as well. On the Isle of Man, the dependency of the British Crown, they plan to diversify from shady financial dealings into medicinal cannabis. They announced plans to have up to 10 firms licensed to grow cannabis by the end of 2025. But oddly, the cannabis licenses sit under the island's gambling regulator. Last year, they issued their first conditional license to Grow Lab Organics, who hopes to soon be exporting 15 tons a year. In Switzerland, the city of Bern becomes the 5th municipality to join the experiment of allowing medical cannabis to be sold at pharmacies. They will recruit 1,000 people and study them for any negative effects. No advertising will be allowed, and the products will be sold in neutral packaging. That's the European Cannabis Report for this week. For more on the science side, see my newsletter on Substack, Cannabinoids and the People. I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creations reporting for Weed Talk News.
The stock market continues its volatile journey this week, with the stalemate over the debt ceiling being the biggest factor. Cannabis stocks have not been free from that turmoil, so here's Doug Miller from High on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Weed Talk News. Cannabis stocks took a nice nosedive last week following the Senate's hearing on the Safe Banking Act. And in some ways, it's expected because any federal cannabis legislative news sends stocks in one direction or another. Now, this dip could have been from the looming debt ceiling that the government is just playing games with. They like to wait for the last minute to resolve this, and this time they're kind of playing with fire. So as the time keeps ticking, every stock, every company in every sector seems to be dipping unless you're an AI company. Now, let's look at Cresco Labs because they just reported their first quarter results and their revenue dropped by 3%. Now, as of March 31st, 2023, their current assets were at 286 million and a restricted cash of 90 million. They had about $382 million in debt. Again, you have to look at the balance sheet to look at the important information. And now let's go ahead and look at the stock chart. It's trading around $1.87. It wants to curl up, so watch for that pullback and dips for a good opportunity. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Weed Talk News, I'm Doug Miller.
And finally tonight, a story out of California, the nation's #1 cannabis market. With all that business and opportunity in the Golden State, there are always scammers out there looking to con you out of money. Well, sure enough, disbarred attorney 68-year-old Mark Roy Anderson was indicted on 5 counts of wire fraud, where he bilked investors out of $9 million to fund his non-existent hemp farm. Now, when you invest money, it's always good to do thorough background checks on the people you are funding. But many of them found out that Mark Roy Anderson was arrested for fraud from another scam that got him an 11-year jail sentence in 2012. When potential new investors asked him about his past, he claimed it was a different Mark Roy Anderson, and they believed him. Only in the cannabis world. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Elena Pinto, and remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product.
Both cool the smoke from 1300 degrees to just 90 into your lungs. Plus, the maze pipe and pre-roll filters get rid of all the gunk that you just don't want in your lungs if you can help it.
Add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
We are a cultivation through to consumption lifestyle brand for the cannabis industry. Of course, the crown jewel in our product line is the Armoire home grow system. So now with Green Goddess Supply, we can take you everywhere from growing it in the Armoire right through to storing it, consuming it, rolling it, storing it, you name it, A to Z. Our goal is to enable everybody and anybody anywhere to be able to produce their own organic flower quickly, easily, discreetly, and inexpensively.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Safetiva Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Safetiva understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Safetiva Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to safetiva.com. The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Cannatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at cannatrolls.com.